Welcome to my channel, dear followers. Today I'm going to tell you about the slow life of the Roman shepherds. Sit back, close your eyes, and let yourself be carried away by the story. Subscribe and please leave a comment. Far from the roar of the Colosseum and the marble ambition of the Forum, across the sun-worn hills of central Italy, another kind of Roman life unfolded at an entirely different rhythm, measured not in political victories or military campaigns, but in the slow movement of the sun, the changing of the seasons, and the quiet, watchful patience of a man alone with his flock. The Roman shepherd rarely appears in the grand narratives of empire, yet his labor, his knowledge of the land, and the wool and meat his flocks produced, sustained the Roman world in ways every bit as essential as any senator's decree. This was a life built on solitude, endurance, and an intimate, generations-deep understanding of animals, weather, and terrain, a life so fundamentally different from the fast-moving political drama of the city that Roman poets themselves turned to it as a symbol of peace and simplicity, an escape from ambition into something older and more enduring. Over the next few hours, we will walk alongside the Roman shepherd through the full turning of the year, from the long, quiet days on the hillside to the great seasonal migrations that moved entire flocks across the length of Italy, and in doing so, we will discover a genuinely slower, older Rome, one measured not in triumphs, but in the steady, patient rhythm of the pastoral life. Chapter 1: A pillar of the Roman economy. Sheep and wool occupied a position of genuine and often underappreciated economic importance within the ancient Roman world, since wool served as the primary material for the everyday clothing of the overwhelming majority of the Roman population, meaning that the shepherd's labor, however modest, unglamorous it might have appeared compared to the visible grandeur of Roman urban life, formed an absolutely essential link in the economic chain that clothed the Roman Empire's many millions of inhabitants. Roman agricultural writers, including Marcus Terentius Varro and Lucius Junius Moderatus Columella, both of whom produced detailed practical treatises on Roman farming and animal husbandry that survive to the present day, devoted genuinely extensive and careful attention to sheep rearing within their broader agricultural guidance, reflecting the significant economic weight Roman society placed on this branch of agricultural production, with Columella in particular providing detailed, practical instruction regarding breed selection, feeding, and flock management that historians studying Roman agriculture continue to draw upon as valuable primary source evidence of actual Roman pastoral practice. Roman Italy, along with several other regions of the Roman world, including Spain and parts of North Africa, developed genuinely significant specialized sheep-rearing industries, with certain regions gaining particular reputation for superior wool quality, most notably the wool produced in the region around Tarentum in southern Italy, praised specifically by Roman writers for its exceptional fineness and quality, a reputation that reflected both favorable local environmental conditions and the accumulated generations of specialized shepherding knowledge and selective breeding practice that Roman pastoral communities in these regions had developed over considerable time, illustrating that the seemingly simple and timeless pastoral life this account examines, in fact, rested upon a genuinely sophisticated body of practical agricultural knowledge and regional economic specialization within the broader structure of the Roman economy. Chapter 2: The Great Seasonal Journey. Perhaps the single most historically significant and distinctive feature of Roman shepherding, extensively documented through both ancient literary sources and notably physical archaeological evidence, including the actual worn paths still traceable across the modern Italian landscape, was the practice of transhumance, The seasonal movement of entire flocks across considerable distances between summer highland pasture and winter lowland grazing, a practice that Roman shepherds conducted along established routes known as trachery, some of which remarkably remained in active use for this same essential purpose for many centuries following the fall of Rome itself, with certain routes still visible and, in some cases, still walked by shepherds practicing traditional transhumance in parts of modern Italy today, offering a genuinely rare and tangible physical connection between ancient Roman pastoral practice and the modern landscape. This seasonal migration followed a carefully established annual pattern shaped by the practical necessity of following available grazing as seasonal conditions changed, with flocks typically moved to higher mountain pastures in the Apennines during the hot, dry summer months when lowland grazing became scarce and unsuitable, before being moved back down to the milder lowland plains, including the region of Apulia in southeastern Italy, which developed particular historical significance as a major winter pasture destination for the winter months, a seasonal rhythm that required genuinely significant practical knowledge of terrain, weather patterns, and available water sources along established routes, knowledge that Roman shepherds accumulated and passed down through direct practical experience and oral instruction across generations, representing precisely the kind of patient, place-based traditional knowledge. This accounts broader examination of the shepherd's slow, deliberate way of life seeks to illuminate. Chapter 3, A Day Measured by the Sun. The daily rhythm of the Roman shepherd's working life followed a pattern shaped almost entirely by natural light and the practical needs of the flock, rather than by any of the civic or commercial schedules that structured urban Roman daily life, a genuinely distinctive feature of pastoral existence that ancient writers, including the poet Virgil in his pastoral poetry collection known as the Eclogues, specifically celebrated as embodying a simpler, more natural existence, standing in deliberate contrast to the ambition and complexity of urban Roman political life. A shepherd's day typically began at first light, leading the flock out from its overnight enclosure to available grazing land, a task requiring careful ongoing attention throughout the day to ensure the flock remained safely together and had access to adequate water, particularly critical during the hot and dry summer months when water sources required careful practical management. Ancient Roman agricultural writers, including Varro in his surviving treatise, provide genuinely detailed practical guidance regarding the shepherd's daily equipment and practice, describing the essential role of the shepherd's staff, used both for guiding the flock and, when needed, for physical protection, along with the practical importance of well-trained shepherd dogs, animals that Roman agricultural writers discuss with genuine specificity regarding proper breeding, training, and care, recognizing these animals as essential working partners rather than mere companions, since a properly trained dog provided genuinely critical protection against the predator threats discussed in a later chapter of this account, illustrating that the apparently simple pastoral daily routine, in fact, required considerable accumulated practical skill, careful ongoing attention, and effective partnership between shepherd and animal that Roman sources document with a level of genuine practical detail, reflecting the real skill and knowledge this work required. Chapter 4, Free Man and Enslaved Herder. The social status of shepherds within Roman society varied considerably, encompassing a genuinely wide range from free peasant farmers tending their own modest flocks to enslaved laborers managing substantial herds owned by wealthy Roman landowners, a distinction that shaped the shepherd's lived daily experience in genuinely significant ways documented across surviving Roman legal and agricultural sources. Large-scale Roman pastoral operations, particularly the substantial transhumant flocks discussed in an earlier chapter that required movement across considerable distances and extended periods away from direct owner supervision, frequently relied significantly on enslaved shepherds, a labor arrangement Roman agricultural writers, including Varro, discuss with genuine practical specificity, including detailed guidance regarding the appropriate supervisory structure for managing enslaved shepherding staff across large flocks, typically involving an overseer called a magister pecoris, responsible for coordinating the work of multiple subordinate shepherds across a substantial herd. This reliance on enslaved pastoral labor, particularly for the large, geographically dispersed flocks moved along the transhumance routes discussed earlier, carried genuine and historically documented social and security implications for Roman society, since large groups of enslaved shepherds, often armed for the practical necessity of predator and thief protection discussed in the following chapter, and operating with considerable practical independence across extended periods in remote rural terrain far from direct owner oversight, represented a documented source of ongoing Roman anxiety regarding potential slave unrest, a concern later chapters of this account will connect directly to significant historical events, including the substantial slave uprising associated with Spartacus, illustrating that the seemingly peaceful and solitary pastoral life this account examines existed within and was shaped by the broader and genuinely significant social tensions inherent in Roman society's substantial reliance on slave labor across many sectors of its economy, pastoral agriculture very much included. Chapter 5, Walvis, Dieves, and the Watchful Knight. The Roman shepherd's responsibility for protecting the flock from genuine and well-documented predatory threats represented a significant and physically demanding dimension of pastoral labor, extending well beyond the simple daily grazing routine discussed in an earlier chapter. Wolves posed a persistent and historically documented danger to Roman flocks, particularly in the more remote highland pasture regions visited during the summer transhumance season discussed earlier, a threat serious enough that Roman agricultural writers, including Columella, devote specific, practical attention to defensive measures, including detailed guidance regarding the construction of secure nighttime enclosures, and as discussed in an earlier chapter, the essential protective role of properly trained guard dogs, animals whose breeding and training Roman sources indicate was approached with genuine practical seriousness, specifically due to the real defensive function these animals served against predatory attack. Beyond animal predators, Roman shepherds also faced the genuine and documented practical danger of livestock theft, a persistent concern reflected in surviving Roman legal sources that address penalties for livestock rustling with specific legal seriousness, and the isolated, extended periods Roman shepherds spent in remote terrain, often at considerable distance from immediate community support or protection, meant that shepherds frequently carried and were prepared to use weapons for personal and flock protection, a practical necessity of the pastoral profession that Roman sources document as a normal and expected feature of shepherding life, further illustrating that the peaceful, contemplative image often associated with pastoral existence in Roman poetry, discussed in an earlier chapter, coexisted with a genuinely demanding and, at times, physically dangerous practical reality that the actual working shepherd navigated as an essential and unavoidable feature of the profession. Chapter 6, The Shepherd's Partner. Roman agricultural writers devoted genuinely detailed and specific attention to the breeding, training, and practical management of shepherd dogs, animals Roman pastoral practice regarded as absolutely essential working partners rather than incidental companions, with Columella, in particular, providing surviving guidance regarding preferred physical characteristics for effective guard dogs, including specific recommendations regarding color, described as preferably white to allow clearer visual distinction from wolves during nighttime defensive encounters, and size, favoring larger and more physically imposing animals capable of genuine physical confrontation with predatory threats. Roman sources also document specific practical guidance regarding dog training and care, including recommendations regarding appropriate feeding to maintain the animal's strength and alertness, and in a detail that illustrates the genuinely serious practical value Roman shepherds placed on these animals. Specific guidance regarding protective equipment for guard dogs, including documented use of spiked iron collars, called milium, specifically designed to protect a dog's vulnerable throat during direct physical confrontation with an attacking wolf, a genuinely practical technological adaptation that historians of Roman agriculture note reflects the real and serious defensive function these animals served, illustrating that the shepherd's relationship with his working dogs represented a genuinely significant practical partnership developed and maintained through careful attention and accumulated practical knowledge that formed an essential component of the successful pastoral operation this account has examined throughout its preceding chapters. Chapter 7: Bread, Cheese, and the Shepherd's Table. The Roman shepherd's diet, shaped significantly by the practical constraints of extended periods spent in remote pasture land, often at considerable distance from regular markets or settled agricultural communities, relied heavily on foods suited to preservation and portability, with bread, typically prepared from grain supplies brought along or periodically resupplied during the shepherd's time in pasture, forming a dietary staple consistent with the broader Roman reliance on grain-based nutrition discussed extensively in accounts of ordinary Roman daily life more broadly. Cheese, however, held particular and genuinely distinctive practical importance within the specific dietary pattern of the pastoral profession, since the shepherd's direct and constant access to milk from the flock itself, combined with cheese's valuable practical property of preserving milk's nutritional value in a considerably more stable and portable form suited to the extended periods of remote pastoral life this account has examined throughout its preceding chapters, made cheese production a genuinely central and practically essential activity within Roman shepherding practice. Columella providing surviving detailed practical instruction regarding proper cheese-making technique, including specific guidance regarding rennet use, proper curdling technique, and appropriate aging and storage practice, technical agricultural knowledge that reflects the genuinely significant skill and accumulated practical expertise the successful Roman shepherd needed to develop, extending well beyond simple flock supervision into genuine food production expertise essential to sustaining himself through the extended periods of relative isolation this profession regularly required. Chapter 8: Shepherds in Might and Founding Story. The pastoral life occupied a genuinely significant symbolic and mythological position within Roman culture that extended well beyond its considerable practical economic importance, discussed throughout this account, most notably reflected in Rome's own foundational mythology, in which the legendary founders Romulus and Remus, according to the traditional Roman founding narrative, were raised not within the city, but by a shepherd named Faustulus after being discovered and nursed by a she-wolf. A foundational story that Roman culture itself understood as directly connecting the origins of Roman civilization to pastoral world. This account has examined throughout its preceding chapters, deliberately framing Rome's ultimate imperial destiny as growing directly from genuinely humble pastoral origins. This symbolic association between pastoral life and themes of simplicity, authenticity, and connection to Rome's own origins found further expression through Roman religious and literary tradition, including the god Faunus, a Roman deity specifically associated with the protection of shepherds. Their flocks, worshipped through the annual festival of the Lupercalia, and the broader Roman literary tradition of pastoral poetry, discussed in an earlier chapter regarding Virgil's Eclogues, which drew significantly on earlier Greek pastoral literary tradition, including the poetry of Theocritus, to establish a distinctly Roman literary genre using the shepherd's life as a symbolic vehicle for exploring themes of peace, simplicity, and escape from the complexity and ambition of urban political life, illustrating that the pastoral existence this account has examined throughout its proceeding. Chapters carried a genuinely significant symbolic and cultural weight within Roman civilization, considerably beyond its already substantial practical economic importance. Chapter 9, The Season of Sharing. The annual shearing season represented a significant and carefully timed culmination of the shepherds' ongoing year-round flock management, typically conducted during the late spring or early summer months, with Roman agricultural writers, including Columella, providing surviving detailed practical guidance regarding proper shearing technique and timing, including specific attention to weather conditions and the animal's health status prior to shearing, reflecting the genuine practical skill and careful judgment the seasonal task required to successfully harvest wool while maintaining the ongoing health and welfare of the flock itself. Following shearing, the raw wool required significant additional processing before becoming usable textile material, a labor-intensive sequence involving cleaning to remove natural oils and debris, carding to align the fibers for spinning, and eventual spinning and weaving into finished cloth. Processing labor that, while extending beyond the shepherd's own direct responsibility into the broader Roman textile production economy discussed in earlier chapters regarding wool's central economic importance, nonetheless represented the direct and essential culmination of the shepherd's entire preceding year of careful flock management and protection, transforming the patient, unglamorous daily labor this account has traced throughout its preceding chapters into the tangible wool product that would ultimately clothe the Roman citizens across the length and breadth of the empire. Practical illustration of how the shepherd's quiet, solitary pastoral labor connected directly through this annual shearing culmination to the broader Roman economy and society, this account examined in its opening chapter. Chapter 10, When Shepherds Took Up Arms. The historical connection between Roman pastoral labor and broader Roman social and military history finds its most dramatic and historically significant illustration in the Great Slave Uprising led by Spartacus beginning in 73 before the Common Era, an uprising in which historical sources indicate substantial numbers of enslaved shepherds and herdsmen already accustomed to the practical independence, physical endurance, and, as discussed in an earlier chapter, the practice of carrying weapons for flock protection that characterized their pastoral labor, joined the rebellion in genuinely significant numbers, with ancient historical sources specifically noting the participation of enslaved herdsmen as contributing meaningfully to the rebellion's initial military effectiveness and rapid early growth. Historians studying this significant episode of Roman history note that the particular combination of skills and circumstances characterizing enslaved pastoral labor, discussed throughout this account, including physical fitness developed through demanding outdoor labor, practical familiarity with weapons carried for legitimate flock protection purposes, and the extended periods of relative independence, and reduced direct owner supervision inherent in transhuman shepherding discussed in earlier chapters, made enslaved shepherds particularly well-suited relative to many other categories of enslaved Roman labor to effective participation in armed rebellion, a historically significant illustration of how the specific practical character of pastoral labor this account has examined throughout its preceding chapters carried genuine and, in this dramatic historical instance, historically consequential social and political implications extending well beyond the quiet, solitary hillside existence with which this account began. Chapter 11, the state's share of the pasture. Roman public administration maintained a genuinely significant and well-documented formal interest in pastoral land used through the institution of the ager publicus, publicly owned land available for grazing use, and the associated scriptura, a formal grazing tax levied on flocks using this public pastoral land. An administrative and fiscal system historians of Roman economic history note reflects the substantial scale and genuine economic significance Roman authorities attached to pastoral agriculture, sufficient to warrant dedicated formal taxation and administrative oversight comparable to other major sectors of the Roman economy. This system required practical coordination between Roman tax officials, called publicani, when the collection was contracted to private tax farming companies, as was common Roman administrative practice, and the shepherds and flock owners whose seasonal transhumance movements discussed extensively in earlier chapters of this account brought substantial flocks across specific public grazing lands along the established treachery routes at predictable seasonal times. This formal fiscal and administrative relationship between Roman state authority and pastoral practice carried genuine historical significance, extending beyond simple tax collection, since disputes over public grazing land access and allocation appear in surviving Roman legal and historical sources as a recurring and, at times, politically significant source of social tension, particularly during periods of Roman history when the concentration of public land into large private pastoral holdings, often worked by the substantial enslaved shepherding labor force, discussed in an earlier chapter, generated genuine political controversy regarding land access and distribution. Attention historians connect to broader and historically significant Roman political conflicts over land reform during the later Roman Republic, illustrating that the seemingly remote and solitary pastoral world this account has examined throughout its preceding chapters was in fact directly and consequentially connected to some of the most significant political and economic debates of Roman history. Chapter 12, Shelter on Open Hillside. The Roman shepherd's need for practical shelter during extended periods in remote pasture land, often at considerable distance from permanent settlement, produced a documented tradition of simple, functional temporary and semi-permanent structures suited to the practical demands of pastoral life. With archaeological evidence and surviving literary description indicating the use of simple huts, constructed from readily available local materials, including wood, stone, and thatch, providing basic protection from weather while remaining practical to construct and, when necessary for the transhumant lifestyle discussed extensively in earlier chapters, to abandon or reconstruct as seasonal grazing patterns required movement between different pasture locations. These pastoral shelters, considerably more modest than the substantial and permanent Roman villa architecture associated with wealthy landowners overseeing broader agricultural operations, reflected the specific practical priorities of pastoral life discussed throughout this account, emphasizing functional simplicity and mobility over permanence or comfort, and Roman agricultural writers, including Varro, provide surviving practical guidance regarding appropriate provisioning and equipment for shepherds operating from these remote seasonal shelters, including specific recommendations regarding necessary tools, medical supplies for treating common flock ailments, and appropriate food stores, illustrating that even the shepherd's most basic physical shelter reflected the same careful, accumulated practical knowledge this account has documented across every other dimension of Roman pastoral practice, from flock management to predator defense to the seasonal transhumance journey itself. Chapter 13, Reading this KY. Roman shepherds, spending the great majority of their working lives directly exposed to outdoor conditions across extended periods in remote terrain, necessarily developed genuinely sophisticated practical weather knowledge essential to successful flock management, a body of accumulated practical meteorological understanding that ancient Roman agricultural and literary sources, including the poet Virgil's agricultural poem The Georgics, document with genuine specific detail, describing observable natural signs, including animal behavior, cloud formation, and wind patterns that experienced shepherds and farmers used to anticipate approaching weather changes with practical accuracy essential to timing critical pastoral activities, including shearing, movement along transhumance routes, and appropriate preparation for approaching storms that could pose genuine danger to an exposed flock. In remote highland terrain, this accumulated practical weather knowledge, developed and refined through generations of direct pastoral experience rather than formal scientific study, represented a genuinely significant and practically essential body of expertise that historians studying ancient agricultural practice note likely proved considerably more immediately useful to the working Roman shepherd than the more formally structured astronomical and calendrical knowledge available through elite Roman scholarly tradition, illustrating once again a recurring theme throughout this account, in which the apparently simple and solitary pastoral life in fact rested upon a genuinely sophisticated and practically essential body of accumulated environmental knowledge that the successful Roman shepherd needed to master in order to safely and effectively manage his flock across the demanding seasonal cycle this account has traced throughout its preceding chapters. Chapter 14, A Province-Wide Practice. While this account has focused significantly on pastoral practice within Roman Italy itself, transhuman shepherding and pastoral agriculture more broadly represented a genuinely widespread practice across the diverse geography of the Roman Empire, with historians of Roman provincial agriculture documenting significant regional pastoral traditions across Roman Spain, North Africa, and Roman Gaul, each reflecting practical adaptation to distinct local terrain, climate, and available livestock breeds, illustrating that the fundamental pastoral practices this account has examined through the specific lens of Roman Italy, in fact, represented one significant regional expression, a considerably broader pattern of Roman and pre-Roman pastoral practice, extended across the empire's genuinely vast geographic scope. Roman Spain, in particular, developed significant and historically documented pastoral traditions that some historians connect with appropriate scholarly caution regarding the genuine complexity of tracing direct historical continuity across many intervening centuries to the later medieval and early modern Spanish transhumance tradition organized around the Mesta, a powerful medieval Spanish sheep owners guild, illustrating that the fundamental practical logic of seasonal transhumant pastoralism this account has examined throughout its preceding chapters, shaped by the basic and enduring practical necessity of following available seasonal grazing across varied Mediterranean terrain, proved genuinely durable and adaptable across an extraordinarily long historical span, considerably outlasting the Roman political structures within which this account has primarily situated its examination of the practice. Chapter 15, Shepherd and Farmer, and Uniasi Nyagbor. The Roman shepherds' practical need for extensive grazing land, particularly during the seasonal transhumance movements discussed throughout this account, generated genuine and historically documented friction with settled agricultural communities along established migration routes. Since flocks moving across or near cultivated farmland posed a real and practical risk of crop damage that Roman legal sources address with specific attention, including surviving Roman legal provisions establishing liability and appropriate compensation for damage caused by livestock trespassing onto cultivated land, a legal framework reflecting the genuine and recurring practical tension between pastoral and settled agricultural land use that Roman society needed to formally address through its legal system. This documented tension between pastoral and agricultural land use interests reflects a broader and genuinely significant pattern within Roman rural society, in which the extensive land requirements of large-scale pastoral operations, particularly those relying on the substantial enslaved shepherding labor discussed in an earlier chapter and organized around the large-scale transhumance patterns this account has traced throughout its preceding chapters, existed in ongoing practical negotiation and occasional genuine conflict with the interests of smaller-scale, settled agricultural communities and individual farming households, illustrating that the pastoral world this account has examined, however solitary and removed from urban Roman political life the individual shepherd's daily experience may have been, existed within a broader Roman rural economy characterized by genuine and documented competing interests requiring ongoing legal and social negotiation. Chapter 16, Patstat Atlasted and Empire. The treachery, the established transhumance roots this account has referenced throughout its examination of Roman pastoral practice, represent one of the most remarkable and genuinely tangible surviving physical legacies of Roman and pre-Roman pastoral tradition, with historians and archaeologists documenting substantial continuity in the use of these established seasonal migration routes across the many centuries following the fall of the Western Roman Empire, extending through the medieval period, and in a genuinely notable historical continuity into the modern era, with certain traditional transhumance routes in the Abruzzo and Molise regions of central Italy remaining in documented practical use by contemporary Italian shepherds practicing traditional transhumance into the 21st century, representing an extraordinarily durable continuity of practical pastoral tradition extending across more than 2,000 years of continuous adaptation and practice. This remarkable historical continuity, recognized through UNESCO's formal designation of transhumance as an element of intangible cultural heritage in 2019, encompassing the shared Mediterranean and Alpine transhumance tradition across multiple modern nations, offers a genuinely fitting conclusion to this account's examination of the Roman shepherd's slow, patient pastoral life, illustrating that the fundamental practical wisdom, accumulated environmental knowledge, and careful seasonal rhythm this account has traced throughout its preceding chapters did not vanish with the fall of Roman political power, but instead persisted, adapted, and continued across an extraordinary span of subsequent history, a living historical thread connecting the modern Italian hillside shepherd, walking ancient paths still visible in the landscape today, directly back to the ancient Roman pastoral world this account has sought to illuminate throughout its examination of this quiet, essential, and remarkably enduring dimension of human civilization. Chapter 17, The Festival of the Flock. Roman religious tradition maintained a specific and historically significant annual festival directly honoring pastoral life and flock welfare, the Perilia, celebrated on the 21st of April in honor of Pales, a Roman deity specifically associated with shepherds, flocks, and pastoral land, festival that ancient Roman sources, including the poet Ovid, describe in genuine practical detail as involving specific ritual practices intended to purify and protect the flock for the coming year, including the ritual burning of specific materials, including sulfur and other purifying substances, and documented practices of leaping through bonfires, a ritual act believed to provide protective purification for both shepherds and their animals. The Parelia's specific historical significance extended beyond its immediate pastoral religious function, since Roman tradition also identified this same date as the traditional founding date of the city of Rome itself, a symbolic connection that further reinforced the broader cultural association. This account examined in an earlier chapter between Roman civilization's own origins and the pastoral world, with the shared date deliberately linking the annual pastoral purification festival directly to Roman civic identity and foundational mythology, illustrating once again the genuinely significant symbolic weight Roman culture attached to pastoral life, considerably beyond its already substantial practical economic importance, with this specific annual festival providing shepherds themselves a formally recognized and religiously significant moment of communal celebration and ritual protection within the otherwise solitary and dispersed working rhythm this account has traced throughout its preceding chapters. Chapter 18, the goat among the flock. While this account has focused significantly on sheep as the primary pastoral animal of Roman shepherding practice, goats also held genuine and well-documented practical importance within Roman pastoral agriculture, with Roman agricultural writers, including Varro and Columella, providing specific practical guidance regarding goat husbandry alongside their more extensive sheep-focused instruction, noting goats' particular practical suitability for more rugged, marginal terrain less suitable for sheep grazing, along with their valuable milk production, which Roman sources note as generally more abundant relative to sheep and particularly valued for cheese production, a practical dietary matter discussed in an earlier chapter of this account. Roman pastoral operations frequently maintained mixed flocks, combining both sheep and goats, a practical arrangement that allowed shepherds to take advantage of the complementary grazing preferences and terrain adaptability of the two species, with goats' documented willingness to browse on rougher vegetation including shrubs and lower tree branches, complementing sheep's preference for grazing on grasses. An efficient practical use of available pasture resources that Roman agricultural writers discuss with genuine specific attention, illustrating that the successful Roman shepherd needed to develop practical expertise across multiple animal species and their distinct behavioral and dietary characteristics, further reinforcing the genuinely sophisticated body of accumulated practical knowledge this account has documented as essential to successful Roman pastoral practice throughout its preceding chapters. Chapter 19, Healing the Flock. Roman agricultural writers devoted genuinely significant and specific practical attention to veterinary care for sheep and goats, with Columella's surviving agricultural treatise providing detailed guidance regarding the identification and treatment of common flock ailments, including documented practical remedies for conditions, including foot problems, a genuinely significant practical concern for animals that spent extended periods walking across the varied and often difficult terrain associated with the transhumance routes, discussed extensively throughout this account, along with guidance regarding parasites, respiratory ailments, and other common health concerns that could, if left unaddressed, pose genuine economic risk to the shepherd and flock owner alike. This body of practical Roman veterinary knowledge, while lacking the scientific understanding of disease causation that modern veterinary medicine possesses, nonetheless reflected genuinely careful and systematic accumulated practical observation, with Roman agricultural sources documenting specific herbal and other treatment approaches for various flock ailments alongside practical preventive guidance regarding appropriate feeding, shelter, and general flock management practices intended to maintain overall animal health and reduce disease risk, illustrating that the successful Roman shepherd's essential skill set, as this account has traced across its preceding chapters, extended well beyond simple daily supervision into genuine practical medical expertise. Another significant dimension of the sophisticated accumulated practical knowledge this profession demanded of those who practiced it across the Roman world. Chapter 20: Woman of the Pastoral World. While surviving Roman literary and agricultural sources predominantly document male shepherds, reflecting both the genuine historical reality that pastoral labor, particularly extended transhumance journeys discussed throughout this account, was predominantly, though not exclusively, performed by men, and the broader pattern of Roman literary sources generally focusing on male experience and activity. Historians studying Roman rural and agricultural life note documented evidence of women's genuine practical involvement in pastoral activities, particularly in aspects of flock management, conducted closer to permanent settlement rather than the extended remote transhumance journeys, including documented involvement in milking, cheese production discussed in an earlier chapter, and general animal care within the context of smaller-scale family agricultural operations that combined pastoral and settled farming activity. Roman legal and social sources also document women's capacity to own and formally inherit livestock and pastoral property, a genuine legal reality that, while existing within the broader constraints of Roman women's generally limited formal legal and political standing compared to Roman men, meant that women could, and in documented historical instances, did hold genuine economic stake and interest in pastoral agricultural operations, even when the physically demanding daily labor of extended transhumant shepherding itself, as historical and archaeological evidence suggests, was predominantly performed by men, illustrating that the full picture of Roman pastoral life, while centered significantly on the individual male shepherd, this account has primarily examined throughout its preceding chapters, existed within a broader family and economic context in which women held genuine, if differently structured, practical and legal involvement in the pastoral economy. Chapter 21: Borrowed from the Greeks. The distinctly literary and philosophical celebration of pastoral simplicity that this account examined in an earlier chapter regarding Roman poetry, particularly Virgil's eclogues, drew directly and consciously upon an earlier and historically foundational Greek literary tradition. Most significantly, the pastoral poetry of Theocritus, a Hellenistic Greek poet writing in the 3rd century before the Common Era, whose idylls established many of the core literary conventions, including idealized shepherd characters engaged in poetic and musical competition set against an idyllic rural landscape that Roman poets, including Virgil, would later directly adapt and further develop within a specifically Roman literary and cultural context. This literary borrowing reflects the broader and historically significant pattern of Roman cultural engagement with earlier Greek intellectual and artistic tradition that shaped Roman literature, philosophy, and art across many domains considerably beyond pastoral poetry alone, and historians of ancient literature note that Roman pastoral poetry, while drawing significantly on this Greek literary foundation, nonetheless developed genuinely distinct Roman characteristics and thematic concerns, including Virgil's specific engagement with contemporary Roman political circumstances and land policy within his ostensibly simple pastoral literary framework, illustrating that Evans' accounts examination of the symbolic and literary dimension of Roman pastoral life, discussed in earlier chapters, itself represents a genuinely rich and historically layered cultural tradition extending backward from Rome into the earlier Greek literary and intellectual world upon which so much of Roman elite culture, pastoral poetry very much included, was substantially built. Chapter 22: The Price of Wool. The economic scale and genuine commercial significance of Roman wool production, discussed in this account's opening chapter, regarding its fundamental importance to Roman clothing production, is further illustrated through surviving Roman price and trade evidence, including price information. Preserved within the Emperor Diocletian's edict on maximum prices, issued in the year 300, and one of the Common Era in an attempt to control widespread inflation across the late Roman Empire, which documents specific regulated prices for various grades and types of wool and finished woolen textiles, offering historians genuinely valuable direct evidence regarding the relative economic value Roman society placed on different qualities of wool product, with finer wools, including the notable Tarentine wool discussed in this account's opening chapter, commanding meaningfully higher documented prices reflecting their recognized superior quality. This surviving price evidence, combined with the broader agricultural, legal, and literary evidence this account has examined throughout its preceding chapters, allows historians of the Roman economy to reconstruct a genuinely detailed picture of wool and pastoral products as representing substantial and economically significant sector of overall Roman commercial activity, involving an extended and genuinely sophisticated production chain, beginning with the shepherd's patient daily labor this account has traced from its opening chapter, extending through shearing, processing, and manufacture, and culminating in finished textile products traded and consumed across the entire geographic breadth of the Roman world, a fitting final illustration of how the quiet, solitary, and often historically overlooked labor of the individual Roman shepherd connected directly through this extended and genuinely significant economic chain to the broader commercial and material life of the entire Roman civilization. This account has sought to illuminate through the specific and revealing lens of its pastoral world. Chapter 23: The Senators' Distant Flocks. Large-scale Roman pastoral operations, particularly the substantial transhumant flocks discussed throughout this account, requiring significant capital investment and extensive land access, frequently belonged to wealthy Roman senatorial and equestrian landowners who maintained genuine, in many documented historical cases, substantial financial interest in pastoral agriculture as one component of considerably broader landed estates, a pattern of absentee elite ownership that met the actual working shepherds and their overseers, discussed in an earlier chapter regarding the enslaved pastoral labor force, typically operated with considerable practical independence, managing valuable livestock assets on behalf of owners who might rarely, if ever, personally visit the remote pasture lands where their flocks actually grazed across the extended transhumance routes this account has traced throughout its preceding chapters. This pattern of large-scale, elite pastoral investment connects historically to the broader development of the latifundia system, extensive landed estates that came to characterize a significant portion of Roman Italian and provincial agriculture, particularly from the later Roman Republic onward. Development that historians of Roman economic history carried genuine and significant social consequences, including the documented displacement of smaller, independent peasant farmers and pastoralists unable to compete with the capital advantages and enslaved labor force available to these large-scale, elite agricultural and pastoral operations, illustrating that the broader economic and social transformation of Roman Italian agriculture across the Republican and early imperial periods directly shaped and was shaped by the pastoral world this account has examined throughout its preceding chapters, connecting the individual shepherd's daily working experience to genuinely significant broader patterns of Roman economic and social change. Chapter 24: The Tools of the Trade. Beyond the shepherd's staff and working dogs discussed in earlier chapters of this account, Roman pastoral practice relied upon a specific and, through archaeological recovery, genuinely well-documented set of practical tools essential to daily flock management, including iron shears used for the annual shearing process discussed in an earlier chapter, examples of which survive in the archaeological record and demonstrate a design remarkably similar in basic function to hand shears used in traditional sheep shearing well into the modern era, illustrating a genuine and remarkable continuity of practical pastoral technology across an extraordinarily long historical span. Additional essential pastoral equipment documented through both archaeological evidence and Roman literary and agricultural sources included bells attached to select animals within the flock, typically those serving as natural leaders that other sheep tended to follow, allowing the shepherd to track the flock's general location and movement even when visual contact was temporarily obscured by terrain or vegetation, a genuinely practical technological solution to the real supervisory challenge of managing a large, mobile flock across varied and often difficult terrain, along with basic containers for water and the food provisions discussed in an earlier chapter, and simple medical implements for administering the veterinary treatments discussed in a previous chapter, together constituting a modest but carefully considered practical toolkit that reflected the accumulated generations of practical pastoral experience this account has traced throughout its examination of Roman shepherding life. Chapter 25: Stone Circles in the Apulian Plain. Archaeological investigation across the Apulian Plain of southeastern Italy, identified in an earlier chapter of this account as a historically significant winter pasture destination along the established transhumance routes, has documented substantial physical evidence of ancient pastoral infrastructure, including the remains of stone-walled sheepfolds, called jazzi in the local Italian pastoral tradition, that continued this practice into more recent centuries, structures whose basic circular or rectangular stone wall construction providing secure overnight enclosure for substantial flocks, demonstrates a genuine and well-documented continuity of practical pastoral architectural tradition extending from the Roman period through many subsequent centuries of continued regional transhumance practice. This archaeological evidence, combined with the documented physical traces of the treachery routes themselves discussed in an earlier chapter, provides historians and archaeologists studying Roman pastoral practice with genuinely valuable direct physical evidence complementing the literary and legal sources this account has drawn upon throughout its examination, allowing for a more complete and historically grounded reconstruction of the practical daily and seasonal reality of Roman pastoral life than literary sources alone could provide, and ongoing archaeological research across this region continues to refine historical understanding of the specific scale, infrastructure, and practical organization of Roman transhumant pastoralism, illustrating that the seemingly simple and historically overlooked world of the Roman shepherd this account has examined throughout its preceding chapters remains an active and genuinely productive area of ongoing historical and archaeological scholarly investigation. Chapter 26: The Slow Fading of an Ancient Rhythm. The the specific system of large-scale Roman transhuman pastoralism this account has examined throughout its preceding chapters, organized around the substantial elite-owned flocks, extensive enslaved pastoral labor force, and formal state administrative and fiscal oversight discussed across earlier chapters experience genuine and historically documented transformation across the later Roman imperial period, and the subsequent transition into late antiquity, shaped significantly by the broader political, economic, and social changes affecting the Western Roman Empire during this extended period of transformation, including documented shifts in patterns of land ownership and labor organization that historians of the late antique economy continue to actively study and debate regarding their precise scope, timing, and underlying causes. Despite these significant broader historical transformations and the eventual political end of Western Roman imperial authority in the 5th century, the fundamental practical logic, and as this account discussed in an earlier chapter, the physical transhumance roots themselves demonstrated genuine and remarkable practical continuity extending well beyond the Roman political framework within which this account has primarily situated its examination, with medieval and subsequent Italian pastoral communities continuing to practice fundamentally similar seasonal transhumance patterns along many of the same established routes, illustrating that while the specific Roman imperial political, legal, and economic structures this account has examined throughout its preceding chapters did indeed transform and eventually end, the underlying practical human relationship with the Italian landscape and its seasonal pastoral rhythms, developed and refined across the Roman period, this account has focused upon proved genuinely durable across the subsequent many centuries of continued adaptation and practice. Closing reflection. The Roman shepherd, working in genuine solitude across the hillsides and mountain pastures this account has traced throughout its preceding chapters, occupied a position within Roman civilization that was simultaneously humble and genuinely essential, economically vital and yet largely absent from the grand political narratives that dominate popular understanding of ancient Rome. His slow, patient labor, measured by the movement of the sun and the changing of the seasons rather than the political calendar of the city, clothed the Roman world, fed Roman tables with cheese and meat, and provided Roman poets and philosophers with an enduring symbol of simplicity and peace. Standing in deliberate contrast to the ambition and complexity of urban Roman life, even as the actual, lived reality of pastoral labor, particularly for the many enslaved shepherds who performed a substantial portion of this essential work, involved genuine hardship, danger, and, as the story of Spartacus powerfully illustrates, the capacity for genuinely consequential historical action. Understanding this quieter, slower dimension of Roman civilization offers a valuable and genuinely necessary complement to the more familiar narratives of emperors and legions, revealing a Rome sustained, in ways both practical and deeply symbolic, by the patient, watchful labor of men who spent their working lives not in the roar of the city, but in the enduring quiet of the hills. Thank you for watching my channel. I hope you enjoyed the historical narration. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and leave a comment. This content was generated by artificial intelligence.